Hey Picture Perfect people, it is Katie with Picture Perfect Lawn Maintenance here to talk to you about new construction lawn problems. Now this might sound kind of weird. It's not the usual fertilizer, weed control, aeration kind of talk that we do that's more service focused and why services are done, how they work, when to do them, that kind of thing. This is more in the realm of issues that you can't really control, but that it's very valuable to understand. So I want to explain to you why new build homes in our area and in other parts of the country are a lot more likely to have issues in terms of establishing a healthy lawn.
Brought to you by Rocks.
Whether it's an issue caused by the grading of a new property or the installation of the sod itself, there are a lot of things that not only can go wrong in the short term, but that can set you up for a lot of long-term grief, where the impact of a new build situation comes into play on your yard. Now we have to keep in mind, for anybody who's buying a new construction home, the lawn is a low priority in terms of deciding when to build and where to build. There's a lot of other factors. Do you want a basement? Do we have to move in by June? There's other things going on. So I know that 99% of people are not going to be prioritizing their lawn when they're kind of thinking about the big picture. And I sure know that builders, contractors, realtors, everybody else isn't necessarily thinking about the lawn, and that's fine. But I want to put this information out there for when I, as a lawn and turf management sales representative, come to you and say, this is going to be tricky, or when 18 months in you're not seeing really big returns on your lawn and you're fussing at your company and they're saying, well, there's these other issues. You understand why that's not just a line. We're not just feeding you a line and kind of trying to gloss things over. It's science. So before we can get started on all these issues that pop up, I need to take you back to 8th grade earth science class and talk to you about soil horizons.
Did you ever stop to think that the whole world is covered with rocks? And every rock used to be different. When you're looking at a rock, you're looking at history. Careful.
I want you to think of a soil system from a geological perspective as kind of a funky sandwich. Your top bun is your organic matter, and your bottom bun is your bedrock. So soil is this stratification of decomposing organic matter, your leaf litter, your dead chipmunk, all those things, and then it's coming and meeting and phasing with that breakdown and weathered bedrock and mineral material. So the more surface your soil is, so the higher up we are at that surface layer, the more it's focused on organic matter and compost. And the farther down we get, the more it's kind of that grayscale fade, the more it's turning into mineralized components, and the more coarse those minerals are because the less and less weathered they are until it finally becomes that bedrock. Every region has a very different sandwich. You can have one area that's got a really tall stacked club, and you can have one area that's got a very simple BLT. There's a lot of different types of soil systems that have very different ratios within that sandwich, as well as different fine components to that. So you can have different types of organic matter that are going in. It can be really plant-based, which it would be in a forest, or it can be very limited in general, which it would be in a desert. Or you can have a bedrock of granite, which is going to have a lot of gravel coming up, or you can have, like down in Florida, a much softer limestone kind of bed that's going to break down very quickly and weather out, so you have a lot of water in there. There's just a ton that goes on. I'm not going to take you to college level geology in terms of that, but in our area specifically, it's kind of that neutral zone. We've got a famous bedrock deposit known as the Petersburg granite, and then we've also got a generally naturally wooded area, so we are technically kind of a standard sandwich. Pretty standard. You need a balanced sandwich to have a healthy biome. That's why the desert, where it's all mineral input and very little organic matter, isn't growing much. It's growing cactuses and stuff like that that are designed for that hostile kind of environment. So ecologically, It's a very complex system. It's nature. That's just going to be how it is. But when we kind of refine that and look at it through a turf management lens, we want to see a soil system that is ideal for grass. So these layers of soil, as we're kind of phasing down, are called horizons. And there are very many of them, especially based on who you're asking. But from a basic standard perspective, there are 5 that I want you guys to know about so that we have some context into what I'm going to explain later on in this video. At the top is your O horizon. This is the litter layer made up of organic plant material at different points of decomposition. You can think of this kind of as your forest floor, or your lawn even is technically the O horizon. The A horizon is your surface soil, or the natural topsoil that's resting beneath the fresh organic material. It is considered the richest soil in organic matter and is most ideal for healthy lawn growth. The B horizon is also known as the subsoil, or what we distinguish as plain old dirt, having a soil structure with less organic material but a similar consistency where it's generally fairly fine. The C horizon is the space in which the rock has weathered enough to be loose and mixed with dirt, but little organic matter has reached this point. So it's mostly going to be gravel in our area. It's a lot of coarse, sandy stuff with big chunks of rock that are only just starting to weather away. And finally is your R horizon. This is the bedrock that supports all of these soil layers. And that image I was showing you is an example of a soil profile. So if you also are a dirt nerd and like a good soil profile, be sure to send me any links that you have to things that are good examples of what I'm trying to explain. And I know this is a very oversimplified and basic explanation of an extremely complex science. Please don't mistake this video as me trying to be a geology authority in any way, shape, or form. I just think it's a good idea to have a baseline of standard knowledge to give context to what I'm about to tell you about how it impacts your lawn. During construction of anything, including your house, it is expected and necessary for a certain amount of dirt to be scraped away in the process known as grading. So when we're grading that lot, we're kind of scooping some soil out, we're leveling it, scraping it over so that it's going to be primed for a structure to be built. This is safe and efficient and a standard, so I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that it's wrong. I'm just saying we're messing with soil at that point. Grading a yard varies in how extreme it ends up having to be based on several factors. How wooded it is, how steep the lot is, or how surrounding properties and roads are already graded. Most of the time, grading a property lower is easier, faster, and more cost-effective than trying to build it up by bringing in fill dirt. Now, this is where some of those new construction lawn problems start to begin. When an area is graded, we are almost always losing the O and A horizons. The O horizon kind of makes sense. We're scraping that away if we're creating a new flower bed to plant a little bush on our tree line, so it's gonna be gone just by default. But remember, that A horizon is basically our natural topsoil. It's that happy place where there's a lot of microbes and a lot of life support and organic material, and it's where your grass really does the majority of its growing. And that O horizon, even though it's a given that we're going to lose that, and that doesn't sound like a big deal, it is, because that's what turns into the A horizon. So not only are you losing your topsoil, you're also losing its source for replenishment on a natural scale. We're coming down to the B horizon. So it's dirt. It's not a ton of organic matter, but it's some. But in a lot of situations that I've seen, and in a necessary evil, sometimes we're coming down into that C horizon, and that's where we see a lot of rocks starting to become exposed. Let me take you out to a construction site, and let's fingers crossed that I don't get in trouble for standing on the edge of it and pointing and saying, look at how terrible this is, so that you can see what I'm showing you in terms of how this ends up looking partway through. Alright guys, so I'm here in a Chesterfield neighborhood that is one of the fastest growing in the area and is extremely popular. And it's actually one of my favorite neighborhoods that we do services in because it has insanely horrible soil. Like on a national scale, turf management professionals, when they see the soil test that we've taken out of this neighborhood, they say, what is wrong with that yard? So this is a property that is partway through construction. House is still in development. It's being built by a reputable builder in the area. And there's a lot that's still going to happen. A lot of this is still going to be leveled out. Obviously, all of the lumber and trash is, for the most part, going to be hauled away. But it's very, very typical that some of this stuff, that little piece of wood, these rocks, a lot of this is going to get buried when the whole property is eventually leveled and graded and smoothed out. There's a property in another section of the neighborhood that's getting sodded today, and it's nice and smooth. They did a good job with leveling it and grading it that way, but it's still a lot of this junky dirt. So you can see here how sandy this is. And a lot of that orange and red that you're seeing is not clay. It's not that red Georgia clay that you hear about in country songs and that I grew up with. It's still sandy for the most part, but that coloration is being caused by very, very high levels of iron. Now these rocks are showing where the driveway is going to be going, and for the most part they're going to be covered by the pavement of the driveway or scraped away depending on the process. But a lot of the time, like where it kind of spills over on that side, there's going to be some situation where there's not much dirt covering that edge, which is part of why you see a lot of die-off and weed growth right along the edge of the driveway. It's a hot spot to begin with, but very often it's got a lot of rock buried shallowly under the soil and the sod. Along the edge of the property, you can see how much digging has been done. There's about a 2-foot drop from where the natural soil line is, and even some of this has been graded when the road was built, to where the new property is being graded out at this point. A lot of digging has to be done for all of the underground structures that are being installed, so this is understandable, but again, you can see that we're left with subsoil. There is really little organic matter at this point that's being left for that sod to go down on top of. Pretty dramatic, right? That's not the healthy, rich soil that we want to be seeing and could have naturally had. And on top of that, that's what sod is just getting slapped on top of, and you've only got that little sliver of topsoil that it came with to really give it that cushion. The reason that this is important is because a specific amount of organic matter is necessary to create a healthy soil system for turf grass and a lot of other things to grow. When this is stripped away, you're losing key nutrients, you're losing the biome that is able to support and facilitate the creation and absorption of these key nutrients, and you're losing the proper texture and grit that grass really needs to be able to hold itself in. You're not going to see fescue growing on the beach the same way that you're not going to see fescue growing on a boulder like lichen does. So when we're coming down to where there are a lot of rocks and gravel mixed in with sand, that's kind of two bad things mixed together at that point. The B horizon is tough enough, but if that C horizon is becoming exposed, a grass root isn't going to grow through a rock. So everywhere that you see these surface rocks or rocks 1 inch down or big bunches of gravel, that's basically going to be a dead spot by spring. Builders always give you the option of whether or not you can sod or just have grass seed thrown down. And I always encourage new homeowners to invest in the sod, because at least then it's an insta-lawn, and seed is so much more difficult, and they're putting out straw, and who knows what contractors grade seed they're throwing out there, and it just sets you miles behind. But since the majority of new homeowners are having that sod installed, it can actually end up making it even harder to diagnose and figure out what kind of grading issue we've been left with, because that sod just covers it up. Most new homeowners of new build properties aren't living there when the sod gets installed. That's one of the last things that's done, but it's usually done within the week of move-in day. It's very, very common for a turf management professional to come out to evaluate a new property and look at the sod and say, oh, that's beautiful and it's a great time of year for sod, so we should be good to go. But underneath that, we've had so much grading done that sod is going to have insanely limited root development, and it's just going to struggle and be unrecognizable by the next year. Outside of that, very few homeowners, and unfortunately very few professionals, are really aware of how these soil horizons work and how dramatic that impact it has can be. Now, while the soil system is both a short-term and a long-term issue, it doesn't just kind of end there in terms of these new construction lawn problems. That's right, the sod itself can be a big issue. Fescue sod is very similar to fescue seed in terms of the ideal time during which it should be laid down. It's all about the roots, so you want to have the longest window possible from the time that the sod is laid or the seed is laid until it's going to be getting hot again the following summer, which is why fall is ideal. And this kind of comes back to how most people aren't going to be thinking about that when they're planning the timeline for the build of their home. If a newly built home has its property sodded in the late spring or the summer, it's going to be a huge challenge to get it to not only take successfully, but stay healthy and thriving. You can have a lot of weed breakthrough, the sod itself can kind of pull apart, you can have huge areas just die off if the irrigation isn't calibrated right, and all of the heavy watering that's required to keep it alive and required to make it root during that time of year can just end up causing fungus and it dies anyway. The deeper your roots are, the better the survivability of your grass during the summer is going to be. So if right out of the gate our roots are this deep, we don't have much of a chance. It's very difficult to walk that tightrope and not fall off because of heat stress and also not fall off because of fungus. That's very difficult. So if you have a hard sod time, you're not alone, but there are different things that can be done to recover it. And one of those good things is fertilizer, because on top of everything else, the only thing that fungus and heat stress really have in common is a vulnerable plant. And one of the key things that creates a vulnerable plant is poor nutrient access. So if you get on a good fertilizer program, get that going, all of a sudden the grass can feed itself, it's taking its vitamins, eating its spinach, and it's going to be a lot better off. Keep in mind, we're talking about nature, we're talking about geology. This is a long process, and turf management is amazing to me in terms of how quickly it can impact processes that take thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of years.
Now this process where rocks are formed, broken down, and reforming as they come out of the molten earth and turn back into dust, into rocks again, has been going on since the world was formed. Billions of years ago. Rocks! Rocks!
One of the best things for a newly built property where its lawn is concerned is to invest in a fertilization program that has an organic compound to it. So a carbon-based fertilizer or something similar that isn't just bypassing the soil system and directly stimulating the grass and making it grow and making it green, but setting it up to crash and hooking it like an addict. You want something that's feeding that soil system and rebuilding and replenishing what was lost during construction. A good organically based carbon-based fertilizer program in the long term is actually going to be building topsoil. We typically see the creation of a half an inch to even an inch of topsoil within a couple of years. And even better, not only is this just a more ideal condition in general, but this is adding soil complexity that ends up holding on to your nutrients longer, which means that you're not losing half your fertilizer to runoff because of your sandy, rocky, crappy soil system. It's a win-win-win-win. So I strongly recommend not to panic just because you have a new build, but just recognize that it's going to be tough for at least the first couple of years. But tough doesn't mean impossible. And the biggest thing that I measure in terms of picture perfect success is progress. I don't expect to see a beautiful, perfect lawn a year after you move in with your new build that has a pH of 4.6 and no nutrients to speak of, but I expect it to look better than it did before we started. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to learn with me about new construction lawn problems, soil systems, and how the two act together, and why you need to cut your company some slack if you've got a new build that's having a hard time. This is why soil testing is so important. So for my professionals out there, I strongly recommend that you soil test new properties, at least when you sign them up, especially if they've been newly built within the last 5 or 10 years, or even more recently. And for my DIYers that happen to be watching our channel, I even more strongly recommend that you understand not only a soil test that you can do, but also what kind of fertilizer you're putting down and whether it's just stimulating your grass or actually fixing the root of the problem. I hope that you guys have a picture perfect day, and we will talk to you later. Take care.